As soon as I beat the Modern Warfare 3 campaign for the first time, I knew I had to make this video. I'm going to talk to you today about why I feel like that campaign is perhaps one of the least satisfying in all of Call of Duty history. And I want to use my little whiteboard presentation here to illustrate that, so it's not just me hating on the game for no reason, but instead it is a considered and thoughtful point, and it's something that we as a COD community can use as a tool to understand what this story did achieve and where I feel like it failed. Now, a caveat before we start is that I feel like the Call of Duty campaigns in general, across all COD games, kind of dodge some of the scrutiny that they maybe deserve because of the fact that so many of the factions and names and events and organizations and everything just kind of blend into one. Like, it feels very homogenous and indistinguishable at times because you find yourself saying like, oh, well, this military faction attacked this military complex and did this military objective. After a while, it just starts all sounding like the same thing. And so what I need you to do is I need you to just give me some serious focus, okay, throughout this video to make sure that you don't lose your kind of train of thought and understanding of what's going on. I'm going to do my best to visualize it for you, but I need you to pay attention as we go, okay? Feel free to like rewind the video a few times if you need to. We're going to spend a decent little chunk at the start of this video just introducing you to who the main key players are in the story at the start of the campaign. And then as soon as we've finished off introducing all of these factions and characters, we'll then show how their stories or their individual journeys progressed through the Modern Warfare 3 campaign, and we'll then look at the net movement of everything towards the end and say, well, was that satisfying? Like, did that do enough for us to even call it a story? Did it constitute a story, or did it just constitute a series of events? That's where we're heading to, but first we've got to introduce everybody. So the story begins with Makarov getting out of jail, and straight away we learn a couple of things about Makarov. The opening scenes of the game are designed in a very specific way to tell us certain things about him. Number one, he is extremely organized. This guy, despite being in jail, is someone that clearly has a lot of power, a lot of control, and does things to the T. He is very precise. We also learn that he is ruthless. He will stop at nothing to achieve his goals. He is very driven. And we also learn that he really requires loyalty. That is a big part of who he is as a character. And an example of this, and a mechanism that the game uses to showcase this, which is good, it shows it rather than just telling us, is that one of his soldiers kind of doubts his plan for a split second during their operation. And that soldier, very soon after, is taken care of, he's executed, because of his disloyalty in that moment. And so we see, oh my god, yeah, this Makarov guy, he really requires the loyalty of everybody around him. So, like, the first mission of the game sets that scene and establishes him as a cool villain. We also learn that he is bankrolled by this Russian oligarch called Milena, okay? Milena is clearly just rich. That's all we really know at the start of the game. She's rich and she supports Makarov. Cool. Straight after we're introduced to those, we're reintroduced to Captain Price. And Captain Price hears that Makarov is out from Laswell down here, and Price takes it super seriously. He doesn't go, that Makarov guy, I'll deal with him later. No. He does a U-turn straight away, and he's like, I've got to prioritize getting Makarov above everything else. As a result of that, we as players take Makarov's organization, ruthlessness, and requirements for loyalty, all of that stuff bundled together into our impression of him as a cool villain. We take that much more seriously because Price is taking him seriously. So we're like, okay, I thought that I had an impression that this guy was a pretty badass enemy, but if Price is also scared of the guy, I'm going to take him even more seriously myself. So that's our introduction to Price. Next up comes Farah. Farah is introduced as working with the ULF, obviously. We know the ULF from previous games. We've got the ULF as almost a character of their own here as well. And ULF stands for Urzikstan Liberation Front. And in our reintroduction to Farah and the ULF, we learn a couple of things. We learn, number one, that Farah, who has her friend next to her killed by Coney, who worked for Makarov in that mission, is very much infuriated by Makarov and by Coney. She's very much against the Russians, and she even goes as far to say that she will make them pay. So we are instantly basically into the idea that Farah has a chip on her shoulder against the Russians, and we expect that to go somewhere. We also learn that the ULF opposes Coney, and Coney opposes the ULF, and in that mission, Coney steal some US missiles that were in the possession of the ULF. So the ULF had been receiving US missiles, that's something we learn, and Coney take them as theirs. It's for that reason that I've got this weapons character here. It's basically, just think of it like a chess piece that moves around from place to place. It starts off with the ULF here at the start of the game, but then very quickly falls into Coney hands. And we can kind of track the movement of those weapons as where the stakes are focused at different points in the story. Now, also in this initial opening kind of act of the story, we hear about Graves and Shepard. These are obviously past characters returning in this game, but the context in which we are introduced to them is that specifically Shadow Company, which Graves kind of runs, they were the ones that were sending the missiles to the ULF, and the question is raised of whether or not it was Shepard that authorized the sending of those missiles, but we've got a question mark on here because in the initial opening of the game, it's unclear and it's left ambiguous as to whether or not it was actually Shepard. It's not a concrete thing to begin with. Now, the last couple of people that we need to be introduced to are down here, really. It's Soap, who's basically just hanging around with Price the whole time. There's not anything really specific for Soap that we need to mark down for the start of the game, I would say, so we'll leave him blank for now, but we do have a couple of others. So let's continue working through the story to see where they really come into the picture. So there are these missiles, right? And the ULF has them. And so Shadow Company have already sent them to the ULF, but then the ULF doesn't fully receive them because they're stolen by Coney, which means they sort of fall into Makarov's hands. And then in typical COD story fashion, it's like, okay, we got to chase the missiles, guys. And that leads to the discovery of there not only being missiles, but also being chemical weapons. So the chess piece of missiles is now kind of two chess pieces. It's like, oh no, we've got warheads and we've got chemical weapons. And as part of all of that transpiring and us learning about the stakes being raised in that way, which is what we've got written down here, Price is injured by the chemical weapons. He gets caught up in the chemical weapons themselves. And this moment happens very early in the game. And again, similar to all of the other stuff here, because it's setting the scene of like where the story is going to go, we kind of in the back of our subconscious think, okay, he's been injured by these things, so that's probably going to affect him in some way. It might be a physical thing. He might be ill or injured later in the game, potentially, or it might be a mental thing. He might be extra set on preventing the usage of those weapons, although he probably would be already because that's his job. So alternatively to that, maybe he's going to be scared of the chemical weapons, or maybe he's going to have some kind of psychological something or other going on. Like, there should be some kind of implication from us being shown him nearly dying from chemical weapon burns, right? Well, we'll see. Amongst the discovery of the chemical weapons, we also have this moment very early in the story, just sort of as a scene-setting piece, where Laswell goes to Russia, meets up with this guy called Yuri, who we're introduced to, and we don't necessarily know whether Yuri is super trustworthy or not. We're like, who is this guy? But once they have a little conversation, it becomes clear that Yuri is patriotic to his country, Russia, but he's also trustworthy for the USA. And so we're like, okay, there's this Yuri guy. And the reason for Yuri's sort of motivations to work with the US here is that he feels that not all of Russia is aligned with Makarov. And so an enemy of Makarov in Laswell is therefore someone that he can trust. And the only other really important person here is Nikolai, who's basically involved with getting Laswell out in this little encounter that these two have together. And so Nikolai is also presumably trustworthy, but that's all we really know about him just at the very offset. Don't worry about this little thing that I've written here. That will become important later. Now, you'll notice as we come to the end of this initial section of the video, just setting up who the key players in the story are, that I've got some green lines on the chart here. I've got a green line between Milena and Makarov because they are allied, they have an allegiance, and they trust one another. I've also got one between Yuri and Laswell because, again, they have an allegiance and they trust each other. I could do one for Price and for Soap. but I feel like that's pretty obvious. I could do one for Farah and the ULF. I think it's pretty obvious. So for now, I'm just going to leave it at that. Now, I'm also going to add one red line here, and that's for Price with Graves and Shepard. It's sort of both of them, to be honest. So Price with Shepard and Price with Graves here. He is not fans of them. He simply doesn't trust them. And as a result, they start off the game on pretty shaky ground, I would say. Farah, though, in contrast to this, actually kind of does trust Graves. And so we're going to give Farah a green line for Graves here. But I'm not going to make it like a reciprocal thing necessarily, because Graves is a pretty mercenary person, and his organization, Shadow Company, will kind of just do whatever the bidding is of whoever's paying the checks. So it's not really about him specifically trusting Farah. It's just that Farah was willing to work with him, and so they came to a deal. I've also added a green arrow for Laswell and Nikolai for obvious reasons. So this, I feel like, is the initial opening snapshot of all of the key parties in the campaign regarding their relationships with one another and also just their internal emotional states. Now, we can continue through the story and we can evaluate how this stuff changes as various events in the story take place. So the most recent thing we got up to is Laswell's visit to Russia with Yuri being interrupted by missiles striking, and basically the ULF is blamed for that attack. So the ULF's relationship with Russia is already on ice very, very quickly in the story. Specifically, Moscow actually labels them a terrorist organization, so we're starting to see the ULF and Russia's relationship break down very, very fast here. The rest of the world as well is also like, hold on, are the ULF just terrorists? And so their overall reputation is called into disrepute. Next, an ex-ULF fighter is framed to have hijacked a plane over Urzikstan from Kastovia, that's where it took off, and the plane disappears and then it crashes, and the ULF denies responsibility, but once again, it's going to be pinned on them because the plane got taken down over Urzikstan. So we have Farah here jumping in to the rescue to try and prevent that from happening. She's successful in this. She steals phones from the site, she wipes the black box of the plane, and the result of this isn't really a great deal of character development, I would say. It's just the ULF's reputation is preserved for a little longer. So it's a success for Farah, but not a lot beyond that. We're just reinforced on things we already knew about Makarov, really. We know that he's organized, he's ruthless, and he's kind of a cool villain. Next, we have a flashback to several years ago, and we're like, okay, like, why is Makarov still alive, right? We get a little bit of exposition. This mission once again reinforces the organization and ruthlessness of Makarov, because he kind of intends to be captured in this mission or this flashback 4 years ago. And then while he's being flown away to jail, this airport blows up and it's like, oh no, we got kind of sidetracked trying to get Makarov, and actually we should have been focused on the airport. God damn, he's so organized and so ruthless. So it reinforces that again, but we also have a really important moment where we sort of see Soap's personality appear as a bit more present for the first time really in the story, and it's specifically anchored around Makarov himself. We see that Soap really wants to take Makarov down, and so I've put that as his kind of primary bullet point here. Makarov actually gives us a bit of foreshadowing, saying that I'll see you, Soap McTavish, again in the future. Very, very on the nose. And so we know that these two do not have a good relationship. They are not on good terms. So back to the future now that we know that that's what happened back in the day, we see Shepard get back in touch alongside Graves. And he's like, hey, I've got some intel, you know, I know you guys aren't on the best of terms with me. Like, I know that this line is red, but hey, you know, I'm going to give you guys some intel. They send intel about the Russian oligarch Milena, and they interrogate her, and they basically make her break and fold on her loyalty to Makarov by interrogating her, specifically by threatening to take her money away, her personal money. So during that mission, we learn that Milena prioritizes her own money over her loyalty to Makarov, and as such, this initial green line between them is broken. She has basically betrayed him in that moment. So with the information they get from Milena, the gang go to St. Petersburg and they kidnap and successfully extract one of Makarov's key henchmen. And this henchman, I could have put on the list here somewhere, except he doesn't say anything in custody. And that's the last we hear of him for the whole game. So like, sure, here you go, Nolan. I gave him a category. His only plot point is that he's mute. He doesn't say anything. After he's captured, it's just like, all right, he's captured. So his involvement is honestly a mystery to me, but we'll put him there for now because, you know, we might bring it up again later. Now, once they've done all this, they go to this abandoned Soviet facility to try and find Makarov himself. What do you know? They think they're finding Makarov. They're actually finding Shepard. And they're like, yo, why are you here, bro? Like, I thought we were going for Makarov. And Shepard's like, he's hunting all of us. Okay, but Shepard says, I know Makarov's next target, and I'll tell you, but you have to extract me first. So Shepard has a new entry here. He is sharing some intel about Makarov, so he's kind of being a little open with some of his old compatriots, but he's doing so in a pretty shady way. So the gang notices that he's being a shady little weasel, and they kind of give him an ultimatum. They say, you know what? Price, Laswell, we're going to come together here, and we're going to say, Shepard, you've got to clear Farah's name, okay? And you've got to give us all the intel you have on Makarov, and you've got to put your buddy Graves here on a leash, because remember, Price is not super happy with Graves. And then we'll give you a warm ride home, or you can just freeze to death. And Shepard takes the deal. So, like I said, he shares that information with them, but he says, screw me on this, and you'll be sorry you kept me alive, to Price. So he specifies here, right? He says, don't do it. Don't you dare. And again, it feels like a bit of foreshadowing when he says that. So the outcome of Shepard's intel, right, is the fact that Makarov is planning to finish what he started with the airport in Verdansk, but now he's going to do a dam in Verdansk and he's going to flood the entire town. And the plan is that he's going to pin that on the ULF, which is what Farah had successfully avoided previously when she wiped that black box of that plane. Now, in this moment, like as part of this, we learn a key thing about Farah, and that's that she trusts Graves. Despite the fact that Price really doesn't and is very sketchy about it all, we see that Farah is a little bit less sort of automatically defaulting to hatred of Graves, and instead is like, well, I mean, he's not the end of the world, right? And we did already know that because Shadow Company had been supplying the ULF with those missiles, but it's even more reinforced in this moment. Now, the gang go to the Verdansk Dam on Shepard's intel, and Shepard's correct. And they successfully defuse the bombs, and it's like, hell yeah, okay, let's keep it moving. So from that, we could say, based on the fact that he's shared this target, is he maybe trustworthy? It's a question, right? It's not confirmed, but it's certainly one notch working in his favor. Now, after all that, Graves over here meets with Price and Farah and Alex and Gaz, and they have a tiny little meeting in which we see Price still very, very cold towards Graves, so that is maintained. And we see Farah wishing there could be some sort of unity in the group and almost sort of showing some expressing of trust towards Graves and wishing almost that Price would be more trustworthy towards him. She basically just wants unity in the group, I think, because it's going to be better for all of them working together. Now, straight after that, Graves is giving them air support, okay, while the crew work on the ground in trying to find Makarov in this one hangar. And they find a bunch of weapons in the hangar, which they successfully destroy. And then they think that Makarov is in a plane or a helicopter, I think it was, that they shoot down, but then they don't look for the body. And Graves is like, yep, I mean, he's dead, but Price doesn't believe it. Now, interestingly, moments ago, Farah was sort of wishing there was some unity in the team, and now there's a moment where Graves is like, Makarov's dead, and Price is like, no, he's not. And Farah's siding with Price now, not with Graves. Now, it's at that point that Shepard, over here, testifies in favor of Farah. So he clears her name, and he clears the name of the ULF. So I've added cleared by Shep and reputation cleared under those two. However, during that testimony to that congressional subcommittee, Shepard says that he did not authorize Graves to kill Task Force 141 or attack Task Force 141. And Graves says that Shepard did authorize him to do that. He just didn't follow through on the order. So I've added that Graves and Shepard both lied to Congress here. They're both still not trustworthy after all, or at least not fully. They've redeemed themselves maybe a little bit because they've been helpful for our crew, but they also have shown that they will say whatever they need to in the general public in order to get their way. Now, straight after that, we learn that Makarov is not dead. Like, this is one cutscene later. It's not even a full mission later. It's just the cutscene following the previous cutscene. And we already learned that, like, he's not dead. It's just, that's wrong. He's alive. I almost question why there was a suggestion that he was dead in the first place, if they were just gonna erase it that quickly. But we find out, yeah, he's alive. And he's in London. And there's this USB stick, and then the USB stick is a Trojan horse, and it means that Makarov gets control of the London train network, and it's like, okay, the stakes now are no longer missiles or chemical weapons. It's actually a bomb in the Channel Tunnel, which is a tunnel going from the UK to France. And so the team obviously go to defuse the bomb, but when they try and defuse the bomb, Makarov creeps up on them, is about to kill Price, but Soap stops him from doing so. So Soap saves Price's life, and then he is executed by Makarov. Now, in a moment that shocked me when I played the game, Makarov, after killing Soap in that scene, simply ran away, and then the credits rolled. I wish I was kidding. He genuinely runs into a tunnel. You see a little boohoo cutscene for Soap being dead, and then it's credits. And the game is over. And the only other addition now to add to our list is that Shepard is just point blank taken out by Price in the mid-credits cutscene. He's let in by Laswell, so that's also sort of a note on Laswell's record. But ultimately, the attempted implication here, I think, is that because Soap is dead, they need to get revenge, and they take that out on Shepard. We'll talk about that more later. And so that is the end of my additions to our list of things that's happened in the story. We now get to evaluate how different things are when looking at our snapshot at point A before the story and our snapshot at point B in blue here after the story's completed. So let's start with Makarov, right? Makarov gets out of jail during this game. We learn that he's pretty badass, I guess. We don't really see a huge amount of it. We see one or two instances, I suppose, like the plane mission, for instance. But then the main other thing that he does of note is he kills Soap. And so it's like, damn, okay, we now as players have a chip on our shoulder where we want to take him down because we like Soap. This also affects Price because Price had stopped Soap from killing Makarov previously, and now Price's life has been saved by Soap, and Soap's life has been lost to Makarov. So Price presumably is going to feel some guilt about that situation. If we look at Price specifically, he took Makarov seriously at the start of the game already. He already hated Makarov at the start of the game, so him now hating him more isn't really a massive development, I would say. He had that chemical weapons injury, which didn't really play into anything whatsoever in the game. Like, it happened and it was a scene, and then we sort of went, never mind. Had that not happened, it would have had no impact on anything whatsoever. And during the story, he expressed that he wanted Farah cleared, and then Farah got cleared. I guess that's a small win in Price's book. He also didn't like Shepard at the start of the story, and then he kills Shepard at the end. So I wouldn't really call that progression of his character. It's just continuation. For Farah, she said that she would make them pay, and she then proceeded to make nobody pay. She literally just didn't make anyone pay for the whole game. She expresses that she trusts Graves, and then moments later expresses that she doubts Graves's opinion on whether Makarov is dead or not, and she's then cleared by Shepard. So again, that's a small win, I'd say, for Farah. The ULF opposes Coney. They receive US missiles as well, and during the campaign, similar to Farah, they are set up by Coney. They are set up to look like the perpetrators of these acts, and their reputation is in disrepute. but then their reputation is cleared, or at least to some extent, in that congressional subcommittee towards the end of the game. So their kind of arc is like, it's the ULF and things are sort of stable. And then it's, oh, maybe the ULF are bad guys. And then it's, no, actually, they're good guys. That's their arc. For Graves, we don't really like Graves at the start of the game, right? We sort of doubt whether he's trustworthy. Like, Price has this red arrow from the very start of the game saying, I don't trust Graves. And at the end of the game, it's the exact same thing. He doesn't trust Graves, and he also lies to Congress, so he shows that he is willing to continue to be untrustworthy. The same thing goes for Shepard. Price at the start of the game has a bad relationship with Shepard and doesn't trust Shepard. And then Shepard at the end of the game lies to Congress, shows that he's not fully trustworthy. He does redeem himself slightly, perhaps, in sharing that piece of information about the target that Makarov was working on. So that's maybe slightly redeemed his character. But he also has that "don't screw me, Price" line, which doesn't really go anywhere. Price doesn't screw him at any point, and so it's a hollow threat, if anything. It just feels like a line that was meant to be enticing or interesting, and then it kind of didn't go anywhere. For the weapons, you got the missiles, yeah, they're dealt with. And then you got the chemical stuff, they're dealt with. And then you got the channel tunnel thing, yeah, it's dealt with. None of the sort of threats there last very long, and they are neutralized very easily each time, it feels like. Like, at one point, like, the chemical weapons literally go off in Russia. It doesn't really feel like the stakes raise. We don't see countries actually escalating. We don't see the doomsday clock getting closer to zero. We don't see sort of significant troop movements of the US against the East, for example, or, like, against Russia or whoever. Like, we don't really see any of that happening. It's just a couple of news reports being like, oh, are the ULF bad? And like, that's it. There is certainly no war footing, even though Laswell at one point is like, we're on the brink, boys. Are we? I don't see it. I see like Channel 5 News being like, this isn't good. And that's it. So as far as I'm concerned, the weapons front, the stakes that the weapons present hardly go anywhere. They hardly do anything for the whole story. Milena, very quickly dealt with. She has money, and then she's threatened with her money being taken away from her, and she folds, and that's the end. So, like, her character is the most sort of boilerplate rich person, prioritizes their money. Who could have guessed? You got good old Soapy here, who wants to kill Makarov, and then Makarov kills him. That's basically it. You don't really get a lot more from Soap in this story. You got this Yuri guy who's introduced as being patriotic to his country and an asset that Laswell can rely on. But once you meet him, nothing else happens with Yuri. Doesn't go anywhere. Could have been an unnamed character. It wouldn't have mattered. Unimportant, to be honest. Despite the fact that his inclusion and the way that they have their conversation really felt like it could have led somewhere. It just didn't. And then Laswell wants Farah cleared, and Farah gets cleared. And that's pretty much all of Laswell's development through the story. She's obviously sad when Soap dies, but I wouldn't really call that character development. I just call that bare bones being a human or trying to write a human. You got Nolan, who's pointless, literally pointless. And then you got Nikolai. And the only reason I added Nikolai into the list, for the record, is there's this one scene where he's in the room, right? While there's this briefing that's coming in, right? And he says, oh, I don't have clearance, and he gets up to leave, but they're like, no, stay. And the fact that that's included is really interesting because it kind of gives us a little bit of a morsel to say, oh, okay, Nikolai's staying in the room without having security clearance. Does that mean that that's going to be useful somehow? Is he going to betray us somehow? Is he going to use that knowledge that he's gained without the security clearance to go behind our backs? Like, is something going to come from that? Nothing came from it. Nothing comes from it at all. Nikolai doesn't have any plot development whatsoever. Literally none. He just is a vehicle. That's it. That's all he does. And so the story, in summary, really just does two things. It finally kills Soap, which we've all kind of been waiting for a while because of the original Modern Warfare story. Like, we knew that that stuff was coming. So it's done that, and it's got Makarov out of jail. But, like, have the stakes been raised here? Well, they've been raised in the sense that Soap's dead. So we're like, oh no, Soap. But, like, in terms of global superpowers, do we feel like the world is at war? No. I don't think we do. I mean, the ULF have been cleared, and what little bubbling of tensions there were while they weren't cleared didn't feel that impactful. It certainly didn't feel like the White House was about to be stormed, you know what I mean? Like, wasn't feeling like it was on that level. You got a couple of other side characters like Milena and Yuri who might as well not have been there, or they had so little involvement that they can just be glossed over. You got Shepard and Graves who start the game untrustworthy and finish the game teeny tiny bit more trustworthy, but still untrustworthy. And for everyone else, they basically finish the game in the scenario that they started in. Farah wants the same thing for the ULF. She's got a chip on her shoulder, but we don't see it realized. It's just a thing that we're waiting for. Price takes Makarov seriously, but we don't really see the culmination of that. We don't get the release. We don't get the catharsis. We don't get the satisfaction. We don't get the moment of resolution. It just doesn't come. And I know some of you are probably thinking, well, it's satisfying seeing Shepard getting taken out, but if we had seen that happen at the very start of the game, I would have been like, fair enough. Like, he authorized attacks on 141 in previous games, so like, yeah, it's about time. And it doesn't feel like his actions inside this game justify him getting shot in the head. Or at least it doesn't feel like that to me. Because he does 99% of what they ask of him. And Price just still goes ahead and takes him out. There's no conversation between Price and Laswell being like, well, he has gone most of the way. Like, has he redeemed himself? They don't recognize the 5% of development he has done. It's just like, no, actually, he hasn't developed at all. He's exactly the person that we thought he was in minute 1 of this game, and therefore we're just going to tie up that loose end. And to me, that isn't satisfying. And I'm not even necessarily saying that the heroes have to save the day. Like, if you want to make it that Makarov takes over the world, and then in the next game, it's like an underdog story where you're kind of fighting back, sure, but that's not what we've got here. We've got a story where the world feels like it's in the same place at the end to where it was at the beginning. It doesn't feel like it's moved. Price doesn't feel like he's moved. The ULF don't feel like they've moved. The weapons don't feel like they've moved. Shepard doesn't feel like he's moved. Like I said, 5%, but like I don't really give a damn about 5%. Like Laswell, static. Yuri, static. Nikolai, static. Soap, dead. Right, he's dead. Fine. Is that character progression? Just pop in his clogs or pop in his dome? I don't know, I guess. But if I was to take away like all of these bullet points, right? All of this detail, all this stuff about, yeah, they did this bit in this mission and that bit in that mission. If I was to just erase it all and ask you, what happens in the Modern Warfare 3 story? What would you say? I reckon you'd say, well, Soap died and Makarov got out of jail. Would you end it there? Is that a story? Bad guy gets out of jail and kills good guy. The end. What? It's not a story. There is not a story present here. Do I feel like any character has had their mind changed in this? No, I don't. I just don't. He feels the same way about basically everything. She feels the same way about basically everything. They feel the same way about basically everything. She feels the same way about basically everything. She feels the same way about basically everything in that she only cares about money. Nothing changed. They're completely non-threats. They're just neutralized and it like wasn't even a big deal. He only cared about one thing and then he got killed and the end. It's not a story. That is not a story. It's a series of chasing nukes or other weapons around the world and consistently being like, oh no, they're not here. We've got to go to another complex. And then it's, oh no, the bad guy's going to do something with them. And then it's, oh, can we trust our own homies like this Graves guy? And then it's, oh, I guess not. Yeah, he's still untrustworthy. And it just goes again and again and again. And I don't get it. Like, as someone that friggin' loves Call of Duty, like, why am I embarrassed to say that? Why are you making me embarrassed to say that? Like, I make videos about the storyline of these games, right? Like, that is my job, is to make videos about the story of Call of Duty. You, Call of Duty, are making me, in creating my little whiteboard here, look like a mug. Because I'm here putting all of this effort into breaking down what I thought was going to be a story, but in actual fact is just 2 bullet points spread over 3 hours. Makarov escapes and he kills Soap. Okay. And I feel like, to play devil's advocate, I feel like someone out there is going to say, Milo, you don't get it, right? You don't understand it. The point of the story is to make it clear that Makarov is like a really big threat, right? But the problem is, I already felt that way after 17 minutes of the game. 17 minutes is all it took for this to happen. He got out of jail and Price took him seriously. So for you to have this whole drawn out, oh, let's chase him over here and let's chase him over there. Like, that's not a story. It's just not a story. And then for him to have taken Soap out at the end, like, sure, yeah. That's a plot point, but you could have gotten rid of everything else, every single other thing. You could have had that first mission with Makarov lead directly into him taking out Soap, right? Or maybe, to give it a little bit more gravitas, you could have started the game with the flashback 4 years ago, right? You then could have gone 4 years into the future. We know at this point that Soap and Makarov have a thing, right? We see Makarov get out of jail. We're like, oh no, that's not good. Then we see Makarov kill Soap, and then we're like, oh my god, well, that's like him making good on his word. We really take him seriously now. And then the story could begin. Like, that would have been an abrupt way to do it, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that would have been a better way round. Like, the last thing I want to do here is pretend that very, very rapid pace is what is better. Like, I'm not trying to say, oh, I write this better than they do. But what I'm trying to say is that if you did structure it that way, you could then have a complete runway for a full story with all of that stuff set up as its initial opening beat. Like, the initial opening gunshot that sets the scene could have been that. And instead of firing the gunshot and then, like, the story running the race, right? Instead of that, we've had 3 hours of someone firing the opening gunshot. It's 3 hours of ready, set, credits. I don't understand it. I just don't get it. And this is a game which has such a strong multiplayer, and people have been so hyped about it, and yet the campaign somehow has ended up here. And if the excuse is that, well, it's going to continue in the season updates, then I don't know what to say. If you got a campaign, the campaign should have a beginning, middle, and an end. And this campaign doesn't have an end. This campaign hardly even has a middle, because the pacing structure goes, oh, there's weapons. Nah, actually, it's fine. Oh, there's weapons. Nah, it's fine, actually. Oh, Graves and Shepard might be untrustworthy. Nah, it's actually fine. Oh, there's weapons again. It's fine. Soap's dead. The end. So, like, to try and reroute here back to my sort of more professional self. Sorry if this video's come across as a little overly emotional, right? I apologize. But I really want to stress the fact that, like, if you're gonna market a game even as, like, cutting the heads off snakes, yeah? Do we remember that? Do we remember them being like, yeah, we're cutting the heads off snakes?
It's cutting the heads off snakes.
Where? Can you point to the snakes? Because sure, Shepard, pretty snaky in that previous game, so that's one snake, but then Graves is back in the picture in full force, so that's like a snake that had already had its head cut off and it regrew it. So as far as I'm concerned, that basically puts us back at like a neutral 0 snakes removed. And what other snakes have had their heads cut off? Milena? Like, don't even joke about it. Any others? Anyone else? I'm not seeing them at all. And as far as Modern Warfare 3 being the final game in a trilogy goes, I mean, certainly not, right? Certainly not. It's a big disappointment for me. I was really excited for this campaign, and I just feel like it's gone nowhere. It's done nothing. And I really hope that's something that they can kind of rectify, but I'm really worried that we're going to get an entire year now of filler beats and moments that, like, very gradually bring this forward. So it'll be like, oh yeah, this is what Makarov's going to do next. And there'll be some kind of weapon that we have to stop being used in whatever Warzone map or what have you, for example. And then by the end of the year, we'll have been successful, or it will have been used. And that will lead into the next Modern Warfare game where it'll be like, oh yeah, wow, Makarov is even more bad than we thought because he did that thing in Warzone. And it'll just be like, well, that might as well not have happened. Like, you might as well have had none of that, because again, I already had that opinion after 17 minutes at the start here, and you've not progressed the plot any further. You've just continued to tell me something I already knew. So someone please write a comment and tell me I'm wrong. Someone please write a comment and tell me that, like, the effort that I've put in to this video has actually all been wasted and I've completely got the wrong end of the stick. I would love that. I'd love to be completely mistaken about all this. But as it stands right now, I just got to the end of the story and was like, bro, there's got to be 5 more missions. Like, what? I don't get it. Please, Call of Duty, if you're listening to this, heed my confusion as some player feedback and recognize that it's coming from someone that just loves this freaking game, man. And I want it to be good. And when you get an unsatisfying 4 out of 10 story like this, it does the whole product a disservice. I love zombies, I love multiplayer, blah, 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 whatever. I can't say I love the campaign when you do things like this. I wish I could. I wanted to love it so badly. I was ready to. It's just a disappointment, man. I think 4 is too generous. I think it might be a 2 out of 10 for me for this story because it just did nothing. So let me know. Am I nuts? If you enjoyed this video, please drop a like, consider subscribing. I'll be making more Modern Warfare 3 videos. I'll be posting a load of zombies videos, but the campaign, it's just not cutting it.